A former SASR soldier, lost in the heart of a Victorian High Country blizzard, stood alone on a frozen road. Her ute was dead, her breath a ghost in the dark. In her arms, two tiny Australian Kelpie pups wrapped in a blanket, their lives flickering like the last ember of a dying campfire. No one should have been out there that night. But then, headlights cut through the storm. A red ute slowing down beside her. Behind the wheel, an older veteran with weary eyes rolled down his window and said quietly, "Hop in, mate, no one survives this cold alone." What followed was more than a rescue. It was the beginning of a miracle that healed two broken souls and the lives they carried. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Snow fell in endless silence over the Victorian mountains, a curtain of white that blurred the borders between earth and sky. The forest of snow gums on either side of the narrow road leaned heavy under the weight of winter, their pale trunks like tired sentinels in the wind. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, and the cold bit through layers of fabric and resolve alike. Somewhere in that frozen wilderness, a woman walked alone, her breath rising in ghostly clouds against the darkness. Kira Murphy moved slowly, boots crunching through drifts that reached her calves. Her ute had died more than a kilometer back. An old engine that coughed once, sputtered, and then gave up entirely. She had sat in the silence for a while, hoping it might start again, but when the temperature inside dropped to where even her breath felt heavy, she had stepped out, cradling the only warmth she had left. Two Kelpie pups, wrapped tightly in a wool blanket against her chest. The pups were barely alive when she had found them that afternoon, abandoned by the roadside in a wooden crate, their fur stiff with frost. They couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. The smaller one, a black and tan with soft ears that refused to stand, whimpered occasionally, while the other, slightly larger with a white patch on its chest, had gone eerily still. Kira had seen that kind of stillness before, the thin line between surrender and survival. She kept walking, her breath shallow, the weight of the pups pulling at her tired arms. Her face, hardened by years of discipline, now bore the quiet desperation of a woman who had faced storms far worse than this one. Only they had not been made of snow. At 38, Kira Murphy still looked like the soldier she once was. Tall, strong-shouldered, her dark hair tied back in a tight bun, with faint threads of grey. Her eyes, steel blue and distant, carried the kind of exhaustion that did not come from kilometers walked, but from memories that refused to die. She had been an SASR soldier once, the kind who went where others did not come back from. The war had carved pieces out of her, some visible, some not. Since leaving the service 2 years ago, she had lived quietly, driving from job to job, state to state, never staying long enough for anyone to remember her name. Tonight she was supposed to be heading toward a temporary contract near Omeo. Instead, she was stranded in a blizzard, the ghosts of her past trailing her as faithfully as her footprints. A gust of wind tore across the road, nearly knocking her sideways. She adjusted the blanket around the pups, muttering under her breath, "Hold on, little ones, don't give up on me yet." She smiled faintly at the absurdity of talking to dogs in a storm, but the sound of her own voice reminded her she was still alive. Through the curtain of white ahead, a faint light flickered, orange, steady, and moving. Her pulse quickened. Headlights. She waved her free arm, stumbling forward, her voice breaking against the wind. "Hey, over here." The red glow grew brighter until a ute emerged from the snowstorm, its engine growling low. It slowed as it neared, tires crunching through the ice before stopping a few feet away. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out into the cold. Jacko Thompson was built like the kind of man who had spent his life defying weather and war alike. In his late 50s, his frame was solid but weary, his movements deliberate, not slow but careful. His short grey hair peeked from under a dark beanie, and a thick coat hung heavy over his broad shoulders. A short beard streaked with silver framed a face both stern and kind, the kind that could command respect without saying a word. His pale blue eyes, sharp but calm, studied Kira for a moment before he spoke. "You stranded, mate?" His voice carried the weight of gravel and years. Kira nodded, stepping closer so the headlights revealed her face. "Ute gave out back there. Been walking a while." She adjusted the blanket slightly, revealing the two pups. "Found them earlier, couldn't leave them." Jacko's brow furrowed. "You picked one hell of a night to play hero." He took a step closer, squinting through the snow. "You're military?" Kira hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Used to be, SASR." Jacko's expression softened, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. "Used to be," he repeated quietly. "Yeah, I know that feeling." The wind howled between them, carrying fine ice that stung their faces. Jacko glanced at the sky, then back at Kira. "This storm's getting worse." You'll freeze to death out here if you keep walking. Kira adjusted her grip on the puppies. I just need to find shelter. Maybe a servo. There's nothing for miles. Jacko cut in, his tone firm but not unkind. I've got a hut up ahead. 5 minutes if the road holds. You can wait out the storm there. Kira hesitated. Years of training had taught her to be cautious, even when help appeared kind. But the way Jacko stood steady, unflinching in the cold, reminded her of men she used to trust with her life. The kind who did not talk much because they had already said everything that mattered once before in a place that did not allow second chances. Finally, Kira nodded. All right, I'd appreciate that. Jacko motioned toward the ute. Hop in, keep those pups close to the vent. They'll need the heat more than we do. As Kira climbed into the passenger seat, she caught the faint scent of eucalyptus and old oil, a strangely comforting mix. The cabin of the ute was warm, the heater humming as the windshield wipers carved slow arcs through the snow. The puppies stirred beneath the blanket, pressing their noses toward the vents. Jacko got in and pulled the door shut. Name's Jacko Thompson, he said, shifting into gear. Used to be RAF, Vietnam, back when the world was a different kind of mad. Kira glanced at him, surprised by the openness. Guess that makes us both survivors of bad decisions, she said quietly. Jacko gave a low chuckle, the kind that came more from memory than humor. Bloody oath. For a while, they drove in silence. The only sounds were the rumble of the engine and the occasional groan of the wind against the windows. The snow outside thickened, but the warmth inside began to thaw the ache from Kira's hands. Jacko finally spoke, his voice quieter now. That uniform look. Been a while since I saw one of those outside a base. You coming from somewhere or running from it? Kira stared out the window, watching the snow blur into streaks. A bit of both, she said. Jacko nodded slowly, as if he understood without needing to ask more. Yeah, the road's full of people like that. One's still walking because they don't know where to stop. Kira did not reply, but her grip on the blanket tightened. The puppies shifted slightly, their tiny bodies pressing closer to her. After a few more minutes, Jacko turned off the main road, guiding the ute down a narrow track lined with snow-covered gums. A faint yellow glow appeared ahead, flickering through the storm. That's the hut, he said, roof solid and the fires probably still warm. When they pulled up to the clearing, the snow was falling harder, flakes swirling under the headlights like moths. Jacko parked, leaving the engine running for heat. He turned to Kira. You'll stay tonight, roads will be gone by morning. Kira opened her mouth to protest, but Jacko's tone left no room for argument. That's not a request, mate. No one survives this kind of cold alone. Kira exhaled slowly, the fight leaving her shoulders. Thank you, she said simply. They stepped out together into the storm. The red ute lights painted the snow around them in shades of crimson, glowing against the dark trees. Jacko moved to open the hut door while Kira stood near the ute. The puppies nestled safely in her arms. Their tiny eyes blinked in the glow of the headlights. Two sparks of life against the frozen night. Jacko turned back, his voice carrying softly through the wind. Come on in before the storm buries us both. Kira followed, her boots crunching through the snow. The wind whipped around them, but for a moment it seemed the world had quieted. In the glow of the ute's taillights, two soldiers, both shaped by battles no one else could see, stood face to face in the heart of winter. Their breath rose in mist, their eyes heavy with weariness and something close to understanding. The snow fell harder, covering the road behind them, erasing where one person's footprints had ended and another's had begun. The red glow flickered once more across their faces, and in that fragile light, the two Kelpie pups stirred, their small eyes reflecting what little warmth the world still offered, like a fire refusing to die in the middle of the storm. The storm showed no sign of mercy. Wind howled around the hut walls, whistling through every crack in the old wood as though testing its endurance. Snow piled high against the porch, erasing the road they had come from, until the outside world became nothing but a swirl of white beyond the frosted window panes. Inside, however, a fragile warmth had begun to settle. The fire Jacko had built in the stone hearth hissed softly as it devoured the logs, casting a flickering orange light across the walls. Lined with old photographs and shearing tools, Kira sat cross-legged on a worn rug, the two puppies bundled in a wool blanket near the fire. The heat was working, their fur had begun to steam faintly, dampness evaporating in the glow. The smaller pup, black and tan, alert but timid, had stopped trembling, and now pressed its nose into Kira's hand. The other, with the white chest patch, restless, tried to wriggle free. Easy there, little fella, Kira murmured. You've got more fight in you than most soldiers I've known. The words carried a half-smile that vanished before it reached her eyes. Jacko watched her from the kitchen corner where he stood boiling water in a billy can over an old gas stove. His movements were slow but sure, practiced by years of solitude. The man's back was broad, the curve of his shoulders suggesting both strength and weariness. The faint scars on his knuckles spoke of a life that had not been gentle. "Coffee will be ready in a minute," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse. "Ain't much, but it'll keep the chill from chewing your bones." Kira nodded without looking up. "I'll take anything hot," she said, eyes on the puppies. Jacko poured 2 cups and brought them over. The mugs did not match. One had a chipped rim. The other was a dull military-issue tin. But the smell of instant coffee filled the room like a memory of civilization. As they drank, silence stretched between them, not awkward, but cautious, like 2 people measuring the distance between their ghosts. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire snapped and whispered. Jacko was the first to break it. "You said you were SASR," he began, his tone light but probing. "How long were you in?" 15 years, Kira said, staring into the fire. "Got out 6 months ago." 15, Jacko repeated, letting out a low whistle. "That's a lifetime for some." Kira did not answer at first. Her fingers traced the edge of the mug absently. Eyes unfocused. "Feels longer," she finally said. "Last deployment went bad. Lost my partner. My fault. Maybe not. Doesn't matter much now." Jacko studied her quietly. The younger woman's words carried the flat tone of someone used to burying pain beneath discipline. He had heard it before in hospitals. In pubs. In the mirror. "What was his name?" "Dusty Miller," Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'd served together since our first tour. He was the kind of bloke who could find a joke. Even when hell was burning. We were supposed to clear a compound. Routine, they said. We walked into an ambush instead. He didn't make it out. I did." Kira looked down at her hands. The calluses white against her skin. "They gave me a medal. I left the next week." Jacko's gaze softened. He sat back in the old armchair, the leather creaking beneath his weight. "Medals don't mean much when the one who earned it ain't the one wearing it," he said quietly. Kira looked up, surprised by the accuracy of the words. "You sound like you've been there." Jacko chuckled dryly. "Vietnam, 69, flew helicopters nobody wanted to be in and watched kids grow up faster than we did. Came home and the world had moved on without me." His eyes drifted to the mantel where a single framed photograph sat. A woman with auburn hair and kind, tired eyes smiling in the sunlight. "My wife Sarah," he said softly when he caught Kira looking. "Lost her to cancer 8 years ago. Doctors said it was early. But they were late. By the time we knew, she was gone. I stayed here after that. Figured I'd had enough of noise." The confession hung between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Kira nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. Jacko waved a hand. "Don't be. Life takes what it wants. All you can do is keep the fire lit." The smaller puppy yawned, stretching tiny paws toward the flames. Jacko chuckled softly. "Guess I'm not the only one needs warming up tonight. You name them yet?" Kira shook her head. "Not yet. Wasn't sure they'd make it this far." "Well," Jacko said, leaning forward, "the brave one looks like a scout to me. Always charging ahead before thinking." He pointed to the white-chested pup now attempting to climb over Kira's leg. "And that quiet one, he's got eyes like an echo. Staring deep but soft. Call him Echo." Kira smiled. "A real one this time." "Scout and Echo," she repeated. "Yeah, that fits." The name seemed to settle something in the air. The hut, once haunted by the wind's lament, now carried the sounds of small paws tapping against the wood floor. And the occasional bark so faint it could have been a dream. Jacko laughed softly when Scout tugged at his bootlace, a sound that startled even him. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, shaking his head. "Haven't laughed like that in years." Kira watched him, realizing how rare that warmth must be. "Guess they're good for both of us," she said. The hours passed slowly. They ate simple food, canned stew heated over the fire, and shared bits of stories neither had told in a long time. Jacko spoke about his years as a mechanic after retiring, fixing up old utes for the few farmers still hanging on in the valley. He mentioned his neighbor Shirl Patterson, a tough old woman who ran the local pub and sometimes dropped by with a meat pie or gossip, though he always pretended to be too busy to listen. "Truth is," he admitted, "she keeps me human." Kira found herself talking more than she expected about how she drifted from place to place since leaving the service, trying to find somewhere that did not echo with orders. "You ever find it?" Jacko asked. Kira stared into the fire, the reflection dancing in her eyes. "Not yet," she said, "but I keep walking." The storm grew wilder as night deepened. Wind slammed against the walls, and the old hut groaned but held firm. Jacko tossed another log into the fire, sparks flaring briefly before fading into embers. "You'll stay the night," he said firmly. "Storm's only getting meaner." Kira nodded. "I wasn't planning on arguing." Jacko gave a small grin. "Good, my wife used to say. I don't lose arguments, I just outlast people." The firelight flickered across their faces. The old soldier and the younger one, both bearing scars too deep for the cold to reach. Echo and Scout had curled up together on the rug, their small chests rising and falling in tandem, twin rhythms of fragile life. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the window panes. Inside, the fire burned steady, wrapping the two soldiers in its glow. Jacko leaned back in his chair, his voice low but certain. "You know, Kira," he said, eyes on the flames, "sometimes God sends lost souls to our door, just to remind us, the road home is still there." Kira did not reply, but her gaze softened. The puppies stirred slightly, their tiny paws twitching in dreams. For the first time in months, she felt a strange peace, not the kind earned by silence, but by shared company in a night that should have broken both of them. The dawn came slowly, like a secret the forest was not ready to share. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world wrapped in silver silence. Snow draped every branch, every roof, every inch of the clearing outside the hut. Soft as ash, the sky was a pale grey, brightening to white near the horizon. The world seemed reborn and fragile, untouched, but alive. Kira Murphy stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out at the buried shape of her ute. Only the faint curve of its roof and side mirrors showed above the snowdrift. "Guess I'm not driving anywhere soon," she muttered. Behind her, Jacko was at the stove frying bacon and pouring coffee. The scent of it filled the small hut, blending with the faint smoke from the fire that still crackled low in the hearth. The older man moved with the ease of routine, a quiet rhythm that came from years of solitary mornings. He looked over his shoulder, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "You're welcome to dig that thing out if you're feeling ambitious," he said, "but I'd wait till spring." Kira chuckled softly. "Might take that advice." She turned back to the fire where Echo and Scout were curled up together on a folded blanket. Their fur was fluffy now, dry and soft, and the pup's eyes followed every movement in the room with curious energy. When Jacko set two plates on the table, Scout immediately yipped, tail thumping against the wood floor. "They think everything that smells good belongs to them," Jacko said with a grin. Kira sat down, the heat from the coffee seeping into her cold fingers. She had not realized how hungry she was until now. They ate mostly in silence, save for the occasional clatter of forks and the crackle of the fire. Outside, the snow reflected so much light it seemed to spill through the windows. It was the kind of morning that made the world feel clean again. After breakfast, Jacko pulled on his thick coat and handed Kira an extra pair of gloves. "You're not getting out of earning your keep, soldier," he said. "Storm left a mess out there. The shed roof's near gone and the track to the barn's buried." Kira smirked, slipping on the gloves. "Yes, sir." They spent the morning working side by side in the yard, breaking the silence only with the rhythmic chop of an axe or the grunt of effort. The cold bit at their faces, but both moved with quiet determination. Jacko swung the axe with the measured strength of experience, splitting logs clean in two. Kira stacked them neatly, her movements sharp and efficient. It felt good, simple, purposeful. Every strike, every lift, every breath seemed to thaw something frozen inside her. Occasionally, the dogs darted through the snow, their tiny bodies half vanishing in the drifts. Echo was cautious, circling near Kira's boots, while Scout leapt through the snow with reckless joy, barking at every falling clump from the trees. Their energy made Jacko laugh aloud more than once. "That one's got your stubborn streak," he said, nodding towards Scout. "Figures," Kira said, "the loud one's always the survivor." By noon, the sun broke through the clouds, and the snow on the roof glittered like shards of glass. Jacko leaned on his shovel, breathing heavily, his face flushed pink from the cold. "That's enough for now," he said. "Let's check the barn before it decides to collapse on my tools." The barn was old but sturdy, built decades earlier by Jacko's father, who had been a shearer before the war took him. Inside, the air smelled of hay and old wood. Kira followed Jacko through the dim light, brushing snow from her shoulders. They cleared the doorway, repaired a loose board, and swept the floor. When Kira looked up at the rafters, she noticed a few shingles missing where the wind had torn them free. "I can fix that," she said, already dragging over a ladder. Jacko frowned. "You don't have to." "I know," Kira interrupted gently, "but I want to." From above, she could see the clearing stretch in every direction. Snow-covered gums, the glint of sunlight on the frozen stream, and the hut below, small but alive, She hammered the last nail in place, then climbed down, dusting her hands. "Good as new," she said. Jacko nodded, impressed. "You work like someone who's done this before." Kira shrugged. "You'd be surprised what you learn fixing roofs in far worse places." They both laughed quietly. The air inside the barn felt lighter somehow. Later that afternoon, they moved on to the storage shed beside the barn. Jacko opened the door, revealing stacks of old crates, rusted tools, and forgotten boxes. "Most of this junk belonged to my father," he said. "I keep telling myself I'll sort it out one day." Kira knelt beside a stack of weathered boxes, brushing away the dust. "Mind if I help? Be my guest, just don't fall through the floor. Half the boards in here are older than me." They worked for an hour sorting tools, setting aside things that could still be used. Echo and Scout explored every corner, their noses twitching, tails wagging through clouds of dust. Then Kira opened one box that seemed newer than the rest. A small wooden crate sealed with yellow tape. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lay a framed photograph. She froze. The picture showed two men in uniform standing in front of a Bushmaster vehicle. Both younger, both smiling in the blinding sun of a desert. One of them was unmistakably Jacko. Clean-shaven, eyes brighter, shoulders straighter. The other man was someone Kira knew instantly, even though she had not seen that face in over a decade. Her brother, Liam Murphy. Kira's breath caught. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. Jacko turned, startled by the tone. When he saw the photo in Kira's hands, his face went pale. For a moment, the only sound was the wind slipping through the cracks in the boards. "You know him," Jacko said finally. "He's my brother," Kira said, her voice low. "Liam Murphy. He went missing in Afghanistan 10 years ago. We never found a body. Only reports. No closure." Her grip on the frame tightened. "He served under you, didn't he?" Jacko's jaw clenched. His eyes darted to the ground, the lines in his face deepening. "Yeah," he said at last. "He did." Kira's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "What happened?" Jacko took a long breath, his hands trembling slightly. "That's not a story I've told in a long time," he said, "and maybe not one you want to hear." Kira stepped closer. "Try me." But Jacko did not answer. Instead, he reached out and carefully took the photograph back, his eyes lingering on it as though the younger version of himself might still speak from within the frame. "Some ghosts don't rest easy," he said quietly, "and some truths don't belong to just one person." Kira stood there caught between anger and confusion, the sound of the wind rising again outside. Echo whined softly near her feet, and Scout nudged Jacko's boot, sensing the sudden heaviness in the air. For a long moment, neither spoke. The light through the small window dimmed, the silver day fading toward the grey of evening. Jacko finally looked up, his voice breaking the silence like the first crack in ice. "I think," he said, eyes distant, "the Lord has a strange sense of timing. I buried that photograph a long time ago. Never thought it would find its way home." The quiet that followed felt too big for the room. Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft, slow, as if the sky itself had stopped to listen. Inside the hut, a secret long buried had risen to the surface. And in its shadow, both soldiers knew the peace of the morning had gone. The fire had burned low when Jacko finally spoke. The air in the hut felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. Outside, the snow pressed against the windows, soft but relentless. Kira sat at the table, the photograph still lying between them. The faces in it, her brother Liam's and Jacko's younger self, seemed frozen in time, untouched by the storm that now roared beyond the walls. "You owe me the truth," Kira said at last, her voice flat but trembling. Jacko's weathered hands clenched the edge of the table. His eyes, usually calm, flickered with something closer to pain. "You're right," he said quietly. "You deserve to hear it." He leaned back, exhaling. "It was Afghanistan, 10 years ago. Liam Murphy was under my command. We were assigned to secure an old industrial zone. Routine op, or so they told us. But nothing about that day was routine." Jacko's voice was low, steady, but each word seemed carved out of regret. "We were ambushed, dozens of them, hidden in the ruins. I remember the sound. First, metal scraping on concrete, then the crack of rifles. We lost 3 men in seconds. Liam, your brother, he was the youngest on the team. Smart, sharp as hell. He could have stayed back with the comms, but he volunteered to cover our retreat." Kira's jaw tightened. "He stayed behind." Jacko nodded slowly. "He pulled me out when the blast hit. I caught the edge of it, lost consciousness for a minute. When I came to, the building was collapsing. He was still inside." He paused, staring into the fire. "I tried to go back. Swear to you, I did, but the floor caved in before I could reach him." The flames reflected in Jacko's eyes as he spoke, making him look almost wet. I radioed for extraction, but by the time backup came, the place was gone. They said no one could have survived. But I never believed he just vanished. Sometimes in dreams, I still hear him shouting my name. Kira's fingers brushed the edge of the photograph. The image blurred slightly under her touch. And you never told anyone? Jacko shook his head. They didn't ask. The report said mission failure. I carried that weight home. Buried it under work, under silence. Then Sarah got sick, and I stopped trying to make sense of what life wanted from me. His voice broke slightly when he said her name. After she passed, I came here, figured the world had taken enough from me, and maybe it was time to stop pretending I had anything left to give. Kira stood abruptly, the chair leg scraping against the wooden floor. She paced to the window, staring at the darkness outside. The reflection of the fire flickered faintly in the glass beside her face. You lived, she said quietly, because he did not. Jacko did not answer. There was nothing he could say that would make it right. Kira turned, her face pale and hard. My mother waited years for a call that never came. I told her he was probably still out there. Maybe a prisoner, maybe lost. I told her to keep hoping. Her voice cracked. You could have told us what happened. Jacko's shoulders sagged as if the weight of the past had finally crushed the breath from him. I could not face her, he said. I could not face anyone. The kind of guilt that does not end. It eats you slow. Silence stretched again, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. Then Kira turned away, moving toward the door. Echo and Scout lifted their heads, their eyes following her. Where are you going? Jacko asked. Out, Kira said simply, pulling on her coat. Need air. Jacko started to stand, but Kira shook her head. Don't. She picked up the puppies gently, wrapping them in a blanket, and stepped into the storm. The door shut behind her and the wind swallowed the sound of her footsteps almost immediately. Jacko stood still for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. The fire popped once, sending a spray of sparks into the air, then settled into embers. He rubbed his face with both hands. The silence that followed was unbearable. He grabbed his oil lamp from the counter and lit it with shaking hands. The glow was weak, trembling like his breath, pulling on his heavy coat. He stepped out into the night. The cold hit him like a blow. The wind had softened, but the snow still fell thick, glittering under the lantern light. The forest loomed ahead, quiet and endless. Kira, he called, his voice echoing through the trees. Nothing answered but the wind. He tried again, Kira, then softer, as if to no one. Liam. He trudged forward, boots sinking deep into the drifts. Each step was harder than the last. But he kept going, following faint tracks that disappeared into the woods. His mind drifted, images of Afghanistan flashing behind his eyes. The smell of smoke, the ringing in his ears. The sound of Liam shouting through chaos. And then silence. He stumbled once, catching himself on a snow-covered branch. The lantern wavered, nearly dying. You saved my life, he murmured into the wind. And I've been running from that ever since. After what felt like an hour, he saw movement ahead, a faint shape under a snow gum. He raised the lamp higher, and the light found Kira, sitting on a fallen log. Snow gathered on her shoulders. The puppies were in her arms, their fur frosted with ice. Jacko approached slowly. You'll freeze out here, he said. Kira did not look up at first. Her voice was steady, but hollow. He looked like you, she said. In the photo, younger, but same eyes. I used to think if I ever found the man who was there with him that day, I would hate him, but now, I do not know what to feel. Jacko stopped a few feet away, the lantern's light flickering between them. I've hated myself enough for both of us, he said softly, if that means anything. Kira finally looked up. The anger in her face had faded, replaced by something quieter, harder to name. Maybe that's the problem, she said. You've been punishing yourself so long. You forgot how to live. Jacko's breath clouded in the cold. He nodded slowly. And maybe you've been running so long. You forgot what home feels like. They stood there for a moment, the wind whispering through the trees. Scout whimpered softly in Kira's arms. Echo licked her chin as if reminding her of warmth. Jacko reached out a gloved hand. Come on, mate, he said. Let's get 'em inside. Fire's still burning. Kira hesitated, then nodded. Together, they turned back toward the hut, their shadows long against the snow. The lamp light swung between them, glowing faintly in the storm. When they reached the porch, Jacko paused, glancing at the two small shapes in Kira's arms. You know, he said quietly, sometimes surviving is not about being strong. It's about remembering who was not. Kira met his gaze. Then maybe that's what we're both doing, she said, trying to live for him. Inside, the fire greeted them with a soft, crackling warmth. They did not speak again that night. Jacko fed the fire, Kira dried the pups, and the hut filled once more with the quiet rhythm of survival. Two soldiers, both haunted, both still learning what forgiveness meant, not as a gift, but as a burden shared. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the silence between them no longer felt empty. The next morning dawned softer than any before it. The snow had begun to melt, leaving the gums dripping with silver tears that glimmered in the weak sunlight. Mist curled above the frozen stream near the hut, and the air carried that damp, earthy scent that comes after a storm finally surrenders. Kira stood outside, hands in her pockets, watching Scout and Echo tumble through the half-melted snow, chasing each other clumsily across the clearing. Their playful barks echoed against the quiet forest, bringing a faint smile to her face. Behind her, the door creaked open. Jacko stepped out, pulling on a heavy flannel jacket over his sweater. The man's posture was still solid, but there was a gentler ease to his movements now. "Roads will be passable by noon," he said, squinting toward the narrow dirt track that wound down the hill. "We'll head to Omeo for supplies. Could use a new radio. And I reckon your ute needs a few parts before it's more than just a snow sculpture." Kira nodded. "Sounds good. I'll cover the fuel if they have any left in the town." Jacko grunted, amused. "Omeo's the kind of place where folks still trade favors before dollars. Keep your politeness sharp and your wallet closed." By midday, they had loaded Jacko's old red ute with empty fuel cans and a few lists scribbled on torn paper. Scout and Echo rode in the back seat, their noses pressed to the frosted glass, leaving small clouds of breath on it. The road wound down through the forest, the snow thinning as they descended. Kira watched the trees blur past, lost in thought. Omeo was small, barely more than a main street lined with wooden storefronts and old signs bleached by years of sun and snow. The Australian flag in front of the post office fluttered weakly in the cold wind. A few townspeople looked up as the red ute rolled in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and weariness. In a place this quiet, strangers were a kind of weather. They came rarely and everyone noticed. Jacko parked in front of a hardware store whose sign read, "Keller Supply and Fix It." As Kira stepped out, she could feel eyes on her. A group of old men sitting outside the barber shop paused their conversation, their gazes shifting between her uniform-like jacket and the two dogs wagging excitedly at her boots. "Friendly crowd," Kira muttered. Jacko smirked. "Do not take it personal. Last time this town saw new faces. They were census takers and taxmen." Inside the hardware store, the air smelled of oil and sawdust. A man in his 70s stood behind the counter, his suspenders stretched tight over a plaid shirt, his grey hair sticking out in unruly tufts. "Morning, Jacko," he said, his tone carrying both surprise and warmth. "Did not think you would drive down this soon after the storm." "Couldn't let the snow trap us forever, Hank," Jacko replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "Need some plugs, a belt for the generator and maybe that old tire jack if you have not sold it yet." Hank Keller glanced at Kira, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "New friend, Kira Murphy," Jacko said quickly, passing through. "Ute broke down up near my ridge." Hank nodded slowly. "Good to meet you. Always room for another hard worker around here. Just steer clear of Sergeant Rudd. He's got an eye for strangers." He chuckled as he went to fetch the parts. When they stepped back onto the street, the smell of beer and fried food drifted through the air. Across the road, a small sign swung gently in the wind. "The Blue Duck Pub, cold beer, honest grub." Jacko's expression softened. "Have not been in there for a long while," he murmured. Kira followed his gaze. "Old friend?" "Something like that," Jacko said, then sighed. "Come on, she makes the best meat pie this side of the mountains." The pub door swung open with a familiar groan as they entered. The place was small but cozy, filled with the low hum of a radio and the scent of yeast and roasted meat. Behind the bar stood a woman in her early 60s, tall and graceful despite her age, with silver-streaked auburn hair tied in a loose bun. Her skin was fair, her features gentle but alert, and her eyes, the color of lake water under sunlight, carried both kindness and the weight of loss. When she saw Jacko, her face lit with a mixture of surprise and emotion. "Well, I'll be damned," she said, setting down a glass. "Jacko Thompson, I thought the forest had swallowed you whole." Jacko smiled faintly. "Would have if not for a younger woman and two noisy dogs." She laughed, the sound soft but genuine. "Still rescuing people, I see." She pulled 2 beers and gestured to a booth near the window. "Sit, you both look like you've been living on frostbite and regrets." Kira smiled despite herself as she slid into the booth. The warmth of the pub seeped into her bones. Shirl Patterson moved with calm efficiency, bringing them pies and refilling their glasses without asking. There was a quiet grace to her, Someone who had learned to carry sorrow without letting it harden her heart. When she finally sat with them, she studied Kira curiously. "You've got the look of a soldier," she said, "eyes that see too much and still look for something to fix." Kira chuckled softly. "Retired SASR. Guess the look does not wash off easy." Her gaze softened. "No, it does not. My husband was the same way." She turned to Jacko. "You remember Paul Patterson, do you not?" Jacko nodded slowly. "Hard to forget. He saved half our convoy that day outside of Long Tan." "And you?" He hesitated, voice lowering. "You sent letters to all of us afterward. Still have mine." Shirl smiled wistfully. "He always spoke highly of you. Jacko said you were the kind of man who carried others on your back if the world fell apart." Her eyes glistened briefly before she blinked it away. "He's gone now. Hart gave out 3 winters ago. I keep this place running for something to do. And because people like you still need somewhere warm to sit." For a moment, the only sound was the soft scrape of forks on plates. Then Shirl reached under the counter and unfolded a faded map. "You said your ute is up by the ridge, right?" Jacko nodded. "There used to be a training base not far from there," she said, tracing her finger across the creases. "Old Antarctic sled dog program. Handlers, the works. My nephew used to deliver supplies there. Abandoned years ago, but maybe you'll find spare gear, fuel, or even tools. It's marked right here." She circled a spot deep in the woods. "Call it a hunch, but I think you'll find something you did not know you were looking for." Jacko looked at her with quiet gratitude. "You have still got that strange way of knowing things before they happen." Shirl laughed softly. "Comes with age and heartbreak." They finished their meal and thanked her. She pressed a thermos of hot coffee into Kira's hands before they left. "For the road," she said, "and tell those dogs they're welcome anytime." Echo wagged his tail at her voice as if understanding. As they drove back toward the mountains, the town faded into the snowy haze behind them. Kira unfolded the map on her lap, tracing the red circle Shirl had drawn. "This training base, my brother might have been there," she said quietly. Jacko kept his eyes on the road. "Then we'll go see," he said simply. "Maybe it's time both of us stopped running from the past." The ute climbed steadily into the mist, the sound of its engine mingling with the faint rustle of wind through melting branches, like a promise that something long buried was waiting to be found. The next morning dawned clear and cold, a sky of washed-out blue stretching endlessly above the white ridges. The red ute rumbled along a half-forgotten service road, tires crunching over frozen gravel. Kira sat quietly in the passenger seat, the worn map from Shirl Patterson folded on her lap. Scout and Echo were nestled in a blanket behind them, their small heads peeking over the seat as the forest passed by in streaks of pine and frost. The route was rough, the track narrowing until even the trees seemed to lean closer, as though guarding whatever secret waited ahead. Jacko kept one hand steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the path. His weathered face caught the light in flashes, creased lines, grey stubble, and eyes that looked like they had stared into both sandstorms and snow squalls without flinching. "We should be close," he said. Old Echo Base sat between 2 ridges. Army shut it down after the last handler retired. Some said they left it to rot. Kira glanced out the window. "Funny name," she said. "Echo Base." Jacko smiled faintly. "Every unit that trained there said the same thing. They claimed you could hear the dogs barking long after they were gone." The road ended at a pair of rusted iron gates, one half fallen off its hinges. Above them hung a weathered sign, its paint barely visible beneath years of snow and rust. Australian Antarctic Division, Sled Dog Training Unit. A torn Australian flag clung stubbornly to its pole. Frayed, but still recognizable, the silence around it was vast. They climbed out of the ute. The air was sharp and thin, filled with the creak of branches shifting under melting ice. Scout bounded forward immediately, nose to the ground, tail wagging. Echo followed more carefully, sniffing the snow, his ears pricked. Kira ran her hand over the gate, feeling the cold bite of the iron. "Feels strange," she murmured, "like stepping back into someone else's memory." Jacko nodded. "Maybe it's both of ours." The base stretched across a wide clearing, a handful of long, low buildings sagging under years of neglect. The kennels stood empty, their chain-link fences twisted by time, while the barracks windows were broken or fogged with frost. Still, there was something hauntingly familiar about the place. The order of its layout, the faint scent of oil and hay, and the ghost of discipline that never quite left military ground. Kira walked slowly through the yard, boots crunching against the crust of snow. She knelt by one of the kennels, brushing away frost from a nameplate. The letters were almost erased, but still legible. Unit 4, Handler Corporal L. Murphy. Her breath caught. For a long moment, she just stared. This was his, she whispered. Jacko joined her, his expression solemn. Your brother trained dogs here before he deployed. He said quietly. I remember the reports. Said he worked with one of the best dogs they ever bred. Name was Valor. Kira's hand froze midair. The name struck like a heartbeat through the cold. She stood, scanning the field. Valor, she repeated, almost to herself. I used to see photos of him when I was a kid. Big Kelpie cross, black and tan. Liam called him his shadow. Scout barked suddenly, digging excitedly near the old flagpole. Echo joined in, pouring the snow with determined little scrapes. Kira hurried over. The pups had uncovered something metallic. A faint glint beneath the ice. She brushed away the frost carefully. It was a dog tag. A collar plate, tarnished and bent, but still readable. The engraved letters were faint, but unmistakable. Valor. Kira's breath left her in a cloud of white. She turned it over in her hand, her gloved thumb tracing the letters. He was here, she said softly. They must have left everything behind after the shutdown. Jacko crouched beside her, his gaze fixed on the collar. Funny how things find their way back to those who need them. He murmured. For a while, neither spoke. The wind moved through the trees, whistling softly against the corrugated roofs. Then Jacko stood, brushing the snow from his coat. You know, he said slowly, this place is not as dead as it looks. A few boards, some paint, and it could stand again. Maybe even serve a purpose. Kira glanced up. What purpose? Jacko looked toward the kennels. You said you have been drifting since you left the service. Me? I have been hiding from the world. Maybe this is where both things stop. We could rebuild this place. Turn it into a shelter for dogs that got left behind. For people like us who do not know where else to go. Kira studied him for a long moment. The idea hung in the cold air like a fragile spark. She looked down at the collar again, then at Scout and Echo, tails wagging by her boots. You think we could really do that? Jacko smiled faintly, the first real one Kira had seen from him. We built worse things into something good once. This time maybe we build for the living. Kira nodded slowly. If the past cannot stay buried, she said, at least we can make it grow into something worth remembering. They spent the afternoon exploring what remained of the base. Jacko pried open the supply shed, uncovering old shovels, coils of wire, and a forgotten generator. Kira cleared snow from the kennels, hammering loose nails back into place. The work warmed them, drove away the ghosts. Scout and Echo followed him everywhere, darting through shadows and light. At one point, Kira caught him staring at the horizon, ears perked as if listening to something distant and unseen. Maybe they hear what we cannot, she said. Echo base, Jacko murmured, looking around. Guess the name still fits. As the light began to fade, they gathered near the center of the yard where the flagpole leaned crookedly. Jacko found a length of rope in the shed, and together they straightened the pole, packing snow and stone around its base to keep it upright. The flag, though faded, still bore its stars and stripes. Kira tied it carefully, her gloved hands steady. When they raised it, the cloth fluttered weakly at first, then caught the wind and unfurled fully. Its edges shimmered with dying sunlight, casting long shadows across the snow. The sound of it flapping against the cold air was soft but strong, like a heartbeat returning after years of silence. They stood side by side, watching the flag ripple. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was something else now, something alive. Jacko turned to Kira, his voice low. You hear that? Kira frowned. The wind? No, Jacko said. Listen closer. Through the whisper of pines and the creak of snow, there was indeed another sound. Faint, rhythmic, like breathing carried on the wind. The forest exhaled around them, steady and calm. Kira smiled faintly. Maybe the place is glad to have company again. Maybe, Jacko said, eyes on the horizon. Or maybe it's just the ghosts resting easy. The flag snapped once in the wind. Proud and defiant, Echo and Scout sat side by side beneath it, their eyes gleaming amber in the fading light. The two soldiers looked at the kennels, the empty barracks, the rising moon above the pines. The snow crunched softly beneath their boots as they turned back toward the hut. Behind them, Echo Base stood tall again, its rusted gate whispering in the wind, a promise reborn. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered once more above the valley, a grey veil settling over the mountains. Kira and Jacko had spent the day repairing a section of the roof at the old base. Their breath visible in the cooling air, Echo and Scout darted across the yard, chasing each other through patches of melted snow. The place had begun to breathe again. Each sound, each movement, a small proof of life returning to forgotten ground. Jacko stood near the flagpole, looking toward the horizon. Storms building again, he muttered. Smells like snow. Kira nodded, wiping her hands on her jacket. Let it come. This place could use a clean start. She smiled faintly, then knelt to scratch behind Scout's ears. The little dog yipped happily. They did not hear the ute until it was almost at the gate. A low, rattling growl of an old engine echoing through the trees. Jacko turned sharply. A dark green ute emerged from the tree line, its headlights off, moving with a reckless sway. When it stopped, 4 young men jumped out, their boots crunching over the ice. They were local hoons. Jacko recognized the type instantly. All of them wore mismatched tracksuits and beer-heavy grins. The tallest one, broad-shouldered and red-faced, carried a half-empty bottle of bourbon. His name was Davo, known in Omeo as a lad who drank harder than he worked. His eyes were bloodshot, his beard patchy, and his laugh sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, I'll be damned," Davo said, looking around the base. "Did not think anyone still lived up here. We thought this was government scrap." He kicked at a loose board with his boot. "Heard there were wild dogs nesting in these old kennels. Figured we'd flush 'em out." Jacko's voice was steady but firm. "There are no wild dogs here, Davo, just us. You can turn that ute around." Davo grinned, his teeth yellowed. "Relax, old man, we're just having a bit of fun." He looked at Kira, narrowing his eyes. "Who's your Sheila? Looks tough. Don't tell me you brought the army back to Omeo." Kira said nothing, but the steel in her gaze made Davo pause for half a second before laughing again. His companions, 3 younger men, faces half hidden by beanies, snickered nervously. One of them, a lanky man with pale hair named Roy, carried a cigarette lighter and smelled of petrol. Jacko stepped forward. "You're drunk. Get back in the ute before someone gets hurt." Davo's smile twisted. "Ain't nobody telling me what to do on my mountain." He gestured toward the nearest kennel. "See? Empty. Told you, whole damn place ought to burn. It's cursed ground anyway." Kira's muscles tensed. "Put the lighter down," she said quietly. But Roy had already flicked it open, the small flame dancing in the cold air. "Bet this old wood goes up fast." He slurred. Before anyone could move, he tossed it toward a pile of dry hay near the kennels. The fire caught instantly, a hiss and roar exploding into the air. "Damn it!" Jacko shouted, lunging forward. He grabbed a bucket from the ground, throwing snow over the flames. But the wind turned against him. Within seconds, the fire spread along the outer wall, feeding on years of dry timber and oil stains. "Davo," Jacko barked, "get your men out." But Davo stumbled backward, eyes wide with the sudden reality of what they had done. "I did not mean." His words drowned beneath the crackling roar as smoke thickened. The flames climbed the side of the barracks, turning the old wood into a furnace. Kira ran toward the sound of barking. Echo and Scout were trapped near the main building. She pulled her jacket over her face and charged through the haze, kicking open a door half hinged by rust. Inside, the heat was suffocating. The walls glowed orange. Scout barked frantically from beneath a fallen beam. Kira dropped to her knees, pushing the burning timber aside with her gloved hands. Her sleeve caught a spark, but she ignored it, grabbing the 2 pups and tucking them under her coat. "Got you," she gasped. Outside, Jacko was shouting orders like a man back in command. "Water lines frozen. Use snow. Anything wet." From down the valley came the distant wail of a siren. Shirl Patterson had seen the smoke rising from Omeo and called the sergeant. By the time her pub's old delivery ute arrived, she had gathered half the town, Hank Keller, Sergeant Rudd, and a handful of locals who had followed her through the icy road. Shirl climbed out first, her grey hair whipping in the wind. "Jacko," she shouted, grabbing a bucket from the ute tray. "Tell me where to start." "Barracks first," Jacko yelled back. "Kira's inside." The townsfolk did not hesitate. They formed a line passing buckets of snow and water, throwing them onto the flames. Sergeant Rudd, broad-chested mid-50s, a man more used to breaking up pub fights than battling infernos, took charge of the other side, shouting directions with gruff authority. Shirl's hands were raw from the cold, but she kept working, her face streaked with soot. She glanced toward the firelight and saw Kira emerge from the smoke. Coughing, 2 small shapes clutched to her chest. "She's got them," she cried. Kira stumbled toward her, collapsing to one knee as Scout and Echo wriggled free, tails wagging weakly. Shirl knelt beside her, her breath shaking. "You're a mad woman," she whispered, half laughing, half crying. Jacko appeared a moment later, his coat singed, his beard streaked with ash. "Good work, soldier," he said, gripping Kira's shoulder before turning back to the blaze. Together, they joined the bucket line, refusing to step back, even as the wind shifted again, blowing sparks like fiery snowflakes around them. The fight dragged on for what felt like hours. When the fire finally began to die, the sun had long since vanished behind the mountains. The sky turned indigo, then black, and the first snowflakes began to fall, hissing softly as they met the smouldering remains of wood and ash. The barracks were gone, reduced to blackened beams. The kennel stood half burnt, but the flagpole remained upright, the tattered flag still clinging to its rope. Davo and his men stood by their ute, silent, faces pale with shock. Sergeant Rudd cuffed Roy without ceremony and shoved him toward the police car. "You're lucky no one died," he growled. "You'll sober up in a cell." Jacko leaned against what was left of the fence, his breath steadying. Shirl handed him a thermos of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "You always did have a way of finding trouble," she said softly. He smiled wearily. "This time, trouble found me." Kira approached, her face smeared with soot, eyes shining in the faint light. The puppies lay bundled in a blanket near the ute, exhausted but safe. She looked at the charred remains of the base, then at Jacko. "We'll rebuild," she said quietly. Jacko nodded, his gaze steady on the rising snow. "Yeah," he said, "but not just the base." Kira frowned. "What do you mean?" Jacko exhaled slowly. "We saved more than walls tonight. We saved faith, ours and theirs." He gestured toward the townsfolk still milling about, their breath misting in the air, the sound of quiet relief spreading among them. Been a long time since this valley stood together for anything. Kira looked around, the tired faces, the shared smiles, the snow falling softly over ash and flame. "Then maybe," she said, "we just gave it something to believe in again." Jacko nodded once. The snow thickened, coating the burned ground in a thin layer of white, as if the world itself had chosen to forgive. A year passed, and the valley changed with the seasons. Where black ash had once covered the ground, green grass now pushed through, soft and defiant. The old base, once silent, broken, and burned, stood alive again, rebuilt board by board. A new sign hung proudly at the front gate, carved by Jacko's own hands and painted in bold, clean letters: "Echo Shelter, for dogs and soldiers who have lost their way." The snow melt from the mountains ran clear through the streams that bordered the property. The air smelled of pine and earth instead of smoke. Inside the wide fenced yard, a dozen dogs barked and played, their collars glinting in the morning sun. Scout and Echo, now grown and strong, ran among them like sentinels, leading the younger dogs through the open field. Kira Murphy stood by the porch, her uniform jacket replaced by a simple flannel shirt and worn jeans. Her hair was longer now, and though her eyes still held traces of the woman who had once wandered lost through snow, there was a peace in him that had not been there before. She tossed a stick across the yard. Echo sprinted after it, muscles rippling beneath his tan and black coat, while Scout barked in playful protest before joining the chase. Jacko Thompson stepped out from the office beside the barn, carrying a clipboard and 2 mugs of coffee. His beard was grayer now, but his shoulders remained as solid as the day Kira first met him. He wore a heavy work jacket with the shelter's logo stitched on the sleeve. Echo and Scout silhouettes under a rising sun. "You have trained those 2 well," Jacko said, handing Kira a mug. "They're faster than most men I knew in the Air Force." Kira grinned. They just needed a reason to run. Beyond the kennels, the volunteers were starting their morning routines. One of them, a young woman named Eleanor Myers, knelt near the fence, her auburn ponytail swinging as she poured kibble into metal bowls. Eleanor was 27, tall and athletic, her freckled skin tanned by long hours outdoors. She was a veterinary nurse from Melbourne who had left city life behind to join the shelter 6 months ago. Her laugh was quick and bright, the kind that filled quiet places like sunlight. "Eleanor's got the new ones eating from her hand," Jacko said, nodding toward her. "Literally." Kira watched as she coaxed a nervous shepherd mix to eat. "She has got something special," she said. "The dogs trust her right away." Jacko smirked. "Maybe it's because she does not carry all that soldier silence around like we do." Kira chuckled softly, then looked out over the property. The field stretched down the valley toward Omeo, where roofs now gleamed with new paint. Shirl Patterson had told them the town had not felt this alive in years. After the fire, people started coming by, some bringing supplies, others just stopping to talk. Somewhere along the way, the valley found its voice again. Right on cue, a familiar blue ute rolled up the gravel road. The words, "The Blue Duck Pub," were stenciled on the side door. Shirl herself climbed out carrying 2 pie tins wrapped in kitchen towels. She looked much the same, tall and graceful, her silver-streaked auburn hair now tied with a red ribbon. Her coat was dusted with flour and her cheeks glowed with the crisp morning air. "Morning, all," she called. "I come bearing reinforcements." Jacko smiled warmly. "If that's apple pie, I'll trade you 2 bags of dog chow for it." "Make it 3, she replied, handing him a tin. "And maybe next week I'll bring something for your volunteers instead of just you 2. Eleanor appeared from the yard, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You're a saint, Mrs. Patterson," she said. Shirl laughed. "Flattery will get you extra slices, dear." Inside the hut, the smell of pie soon mingled with the rich scent of coffee and pinewood. They sat together at the table, the same one where Kira had once stared into silence a year ago. Now it was covered in maps, schedules, and a list of donations from townspeople. Shirl pulled a folded letter from her coat pocket. "Got something for you," she said, sliding it toward Jacko. "Town council approved your registration. Echo Shelter's official now." Jacko stared at the paper, a slow smile spreading beneath his beard. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly. "Did not think bureaucracy would ever do me a favor." Kira looked at the seal on the page, her chest swelling with quiet pride. "We did it," she murmured. "No," Shirl corrected gently. "You built it, and now Omio's behind you. Folks are donating lumber, feed, even old kennels from the county pound. You'd be surprised how many people needed this place without even knowing it." For a moment, the room fell silent except for the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall. Outside, the dogs barked and chased each other in the sun, their shadows dancing on the thawing earth. Later that afternoon, Kira and Jacko walked along the fence line, inspecting repairs where winter had taken its toll. The snow had retreated to the high slopes, replaced by muddy grass and wildflowers beginning to bloom. The air smelled alive again. Jacko leaned on the post, looking toward the mountains. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. Kira shook her head. "Not anymore. There's work to do here. Real work." Jacko smiled faintly. "Your brother would have liked this place. He would have seen what you're doing and called it redemption." Kira looked down at Echo and Scout sitting at her boots. "Maybe it's just peace," she said, "something I did not know I was still fighting for." A breeze drifted through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine sap and spring rain. In the distance, they could see Shirl's ute disappearing down the road, her laughter echoing faintly in the valley. The volunteers had gathered the dogs for their evening run. Eleanor blew a short whistle and the entire yard erupted in joyful chaos. Paws pounding, tails whipping, barks rising into the clear air. Kira leaned against the fence, watching Scout chase a stick while Echo herded the younger dogs in circles like a proud guardian. Jacko stood beside her, eyes soft with memory. "You know," he said quietly, "the day I stopped my ute on that snowy road. I thought I was just helping a stranger. Did not know that stranger would end up saving me." Kira glanced at him, smiling. "Guess the road had other plans." Jacko nodded. "Maybe that's what faith really is. Keeping your hands on the wheel even when you cannot see the path." The wind shifted, warm and gentle, carrying the scent of earth and rain. Above them, the flag at Echo Shelter fluttered against a sky that glowed gold with evening light. Kira watched the dogs running free, the laughter of volunteers, the sound of life thriving, where silence once ruled. "Spring came back," she said softly. Jacko smiled, his eyes on the horizon. "Yeah," he murmured, "and maybe this time it's here to stay." The wind moved through the trees like a sigh of relief, and from the field came a chorus of barking, strong, alive, and endless, echoing through the valley, like a promise that the long winter had finally passed. Sometimes what feels like coincidence is something greater, something sacred, moving quietly beneath the surface of our ordinary days. Maybe it was not luck that made Jacko stop his ute that night or chance that guided Kira down the same frozen road. Maybe it was grace, the kind that does not arrive with thunder or miracles, but in small acts of courage, in the hands that reach out when the world feels cold. Echo Shelter was not just built from wood and wire. It was built from faith. Faith that broken things can still be made whole, that compassion can bridge what war and loss once divided. And perhaps in every rescued dog, every soldier who finds peace again, there is a whisper of God's reminder. No soul is ever truly lost, only waiting to be found. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Leave your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe so these stories of hope and faith can reach more hearts. And tonight when you bow your head, may you say a prayer for the soldiers still searching for home, for the animals who remind us of loyalty, and for all who walk roads where faith feels far away. May God bless you and keep your heart warm through every winter ahead.